Time to pull up a chair. We've got another great story for you today in the rLounge. You know you're in the shadow of a favorite child when your car gets treated like a family punching bag. Today in the rLounge, Grand Theft Auto. My parents' perfect daughter crashed my car and refused to pay for it, so I sold her brand new car to pay for my repairs. You know how all parents say they don't have a favorite child, but there's that one that always gets special treatment? That's my 20 female sister, Alice, 18 female. She can literally do no wrong in their eyes. Ever since I was a child, Alice has been getting away with things that my parents would have skinned me for. They were always ready to believe her over me, and Alice would take advantage of that. Sometimes she'd do something wrong and pin the blame on me, because she knew they'd believe her. On a few occasions, my parents, typically my dad, would put the blame on me before we even had a chance to make our case. No, it must have been OP. Alice would never do something like that. If you haven't lived through something like that, then you can't understand what that does to you growing up. I've never been close to anyone in my family. Alice is my only sibling, and I don't like her a bit. Not the usual sibling dislike. I legitimately don't like to be around her. She's spoiled and has an inflated ego and no sense of responsibility. It's impossible to get along with someone who thinks she's never made a mistake. My parents are always on Team Alice, so I'm not very close with them either. I can get along a bit with my mom, but my dad believes Alice makes the sun rise and that I should be more like her, so we're always fighting about something. After I graduated from high school, I took a year off to work and save up some money to buy a car. It was a lot of hard work doing crappy jobs and running errands, but I managed to put the money together and got myself my first car. It's an older car that's missing the bells and whistles, but it runs and I love it. Most importantly, it's mine. I paid for it in full by myself, with the rewards of my hard labor and discipline. When I graduated, I had asked my parents for a car as a graduation gift, but my dad said that my graduation dinner was my gift. I appreciated the dinner, but that didn't feel like an appropriate present. I asked if he could at least help me pay for part of my car, but he refused. I went from asking him to match my savings down to asking if he'd give me $100, and he still refused. So I gritted my teeth and put all the money together on my own. When my family first saw my car, my parents congratulated me, and Alice said nothing. Later, I heard my dad and Alice giggling about how outdated my car was. I didn't say anything to them about it, but I didn't talk to the two of them for a few days after. Alice didn't care, and my dad just complained loudly about my rotten attitude. A few weeks ago, my sister had a party that she wanted to go to with a few friends of hers. They had trouble figuring out transportation because none of them had a car, and they didn't want to pay for an Uber. Then my sister volunteered that I had a car and could drive them. She did this completely without my knowledge. She just walked up to me one day and told me she needed me to drive them. I flat out refused. I wasn't her chauffeur. The sheer entitlement made my head spin. She started screaming at me, saying I didn't want her to have a good time. I shouted back that I wasn't her servant, and that she should have asked before volunteering my time. My parents heard their precious angel upset and rushed downstairs to defend her. They asked what was wrong, and she told them. My dad didn't even wait to hear my side before he said it was my duty as her big sister to take her wherever she needed to go. I refused again, and I told them I wasn't her driver. She knew how to drive, so she could take Dad's car. It turned out that that wouldn't work because my dad needed his car that night. I aggressively suggested that my dad just pay for her Uber then, but he acted like he didn't hear me. At that point, it was just a power play. I maintained that I wouldn't drive her, and they all ganged up on me. Eventually, they offered a compromise where I would allow her to drive my car. I say offered, but they really demanded it. This pissed me off, and I pointed out that none of them had helped me save up for the car when I needed it, and now I was expected to hand it over to Alice. I also pointed out that Alice was a notoriously bad driver who had collected more scratches and tickets in Dad's car than the rest of us combined. Their only response to that was that I should stop picking on her. They spent the next 15 minutes guilt-tripping me, and I eventually gave in. I wasn't happy about it. They'd bullied me into agreeing, and I caved in just to get them to leave me alone. I was in a bad mood for days after that, and my dad continued to loudly remark on my rotten attitude. Eventually, the day of the party came around, and I grudgingly handed over my keys to my sister, while her and her friends loudly giggled about whatever meaningless BS they were going to get up to when they got there. I was very sour about the whole thing. Alice and my dad made fun of my car behind my back, but somehow it was good enough when they had no other option. The hypocrisy of it made me even madder. Before my sister drove off, I told her, "If you scratch my car, I'll kill you." She just laughed and blew me a kiss, and then ran off to the driver's seat. I tried to watch some movies and do some reading that night, but I couldn't focus. My sister's reputation as a bad driver just worsened my mood and made me anxious. Whenever she took my dad's car out, she'd always come to him to come and park it for her. She'd never been in a serious accident, and she dinged Dad's car tons of times against trash cans, curbs, and other parked cars. So you can see why I threatened her before handing over the keys. My car might not have been in perfect condition, but it's my baby, and everyone knows that. I worked hard to buy it, and I worked even harder to keep it spotless and in good condition. Well, I wasn't surprised when Alice called Dad to tell him she'd been in an accident. It wasn't serious. She just climbed the curb and hit a mailbox. She and her friends were more or less all right, just a little shaken up. The same could not be said for my car. The front end of my car was a mess, and the rim was ruined from hitting the curb. It wasn't totaled, but repairing it was going to be expensive. I was glad Alice was okay, but I was pissed because I pointed out this exact concern, and they had said I was picking on her. When Alice got home, Mom and Dad hovered over her like a war hero. Alice was sniffling, and Dad was consoling her, saying, "It's just a car. These things happen." That annoyed me. It wasn't just a car. It was my car. It was the most important thing that I owned. I was glad Alice was okay, but I didn't appreciate my dad acting like my car didn't matter too. The next morning, nobody made any mention of my car. Alice was clearly fine, and my parents seemed to have moved past it. While we were having breakfast, I said, "So who's going to pay for the repairs?" Everybody was quiet, and my dad looked at me like I was crazy. My dad said I was being unreasonable because she didn't do it on purpose. "You have savings. You can take care of it." I just bought this car with all my savings. Alice wrecked my car, and she should pay for it. Alice sat up and said that she didn't have that kind of money. "Besides, why should I have to pay for an accident?" "Because it was your fault, Alice." My mom stepped in, trying to defuse the situation. Her voice was supposed to be calm, but she just sounded patronizing. She said that Alice was still a student with no job, so it was impossible for her to come up with that kind of money. She said that it was only fair that I help Alice out and pay for it myself since I had a job and I was older. I felt like I was going crazy. How are these people rejecting common sense? Alice damaged the car. She should pay for it. That was when I realized that this wasn't about fairness. They were protecting their favorite child from the consequences of her actions, as usual. She had taken my car against my wishes, and now I had to take responsibility for her poor driving. No way. I reminded them that I hadn't wanted her to take my car out in the first place, and I pointed out that I had been scared of this exact outcome. Since my parents were the ones who fought so passionately for her to be able to drive my car, then they should pay for the repairs if Alice couldn't. My dad didn't entertain that for a second. He didn't even look at me when he said they wouldn't pay for it, and that I needed to learn how to help my sister. He said I was making a bigger deal than it was. I stood up and shouted at my parents. I screamed that they always did this, that they would side with Alice, and she never took responsibility for anything. Alice just cried and repeated that she didn't have the money, and my dad shouted at me for making a scene and making my sister cry. I was tired of being around these people, and I stormed away from the breakfast table fuming. It's been a few days now, and my car is still sitting outside. I'm still mad about it, and my family is making me feel crazy for being pissed off. My dad wants me to apologize for my outburst. Can you guys tell me if I'm being the a-hole for wanting them to pay for repairs after they insisted that my sister should take my car? At this point, it's almost like your car has a better chance of getting parental love than you do, OP. Seriously though, it's wild how they think that it's okay for Alice to smash your hard-earned property while you're expected to be the responsible adult. At the very least, they should learn that actions have consequences, especially when one of those actions involves destroying someone else's belongings. So no, you're definitely not the a-hole, OP. Update. Things didn't get better with my family, so I was forced to take matters into my own hands. For those of you who thought I was the a-hole before, well, you definitely won't like me after what I did. It might have been a little extreme, but I didn't have much choice left. I feel like they pushed me to this point. After the confrontation, I spent a few days just being mad. My parents refused to acknowledge the fact that I'd been done wrong. I tried to talk to my mom when she was alone, hoping that she would be more reasonable, but there was no luck. She just gave me the same condescending look and repeated that Alice had no money to pay for the repairs. When I tried to suggest that they should pay for it, my mom just told me to let it go. I realized that they were just too stubborn to see reason, so I sucked it up and got to work on fixing my car myself. For the next few weeks, I saved every penny I could to get started on my car repairs. My car sat in the driveway all that time, constantly reminding me how much my parents didn't respect me for my hard work. They'd been disrespecting me and lording their favoritism for Alice over my head for years. I'd had enough, and the perfect avenue for retribution showed itself in the summer. Alice was graduating, and my parents bought her a nice new car as a graduation present. A brand new car, when the one I'd worked my butt off to afford was sitting in the driveway, useless. A brand new car as a graduation gift, when I couldn't get $100 to help me buy mine. I'd always known Alice was their favorite, but this was the first time in my life that I thought they might not even care about me. When I saw her new car, I didn't say anything or show any emotion. but I cried in my room that night. The next morning, I wasn't sad anymore, just majorly pissed off. I considered talking to my parents about how unfair this was, but I knew it would be no good. My mom would be patronizing, and my dad would dismiss me entirely. I didn't even want to hear what their justification would be for why she could get a new car, but I couldn't get more than a dinner. They firmly believed that Alice's accident was, well, an accident, and she shouldn't be held responsible for it. Just thinking about talking to them again made my blood boil. That was when I decided that if Alice wasn't going to be responsible and my parents wouldn't hold her accountable, then I would take matters into my own hands. I got in touch with a friend of mine, an acquaintance really, from high school who knew all sorts of shady people. I asked him for the number of someone who would buy a car without the proper documentation. No questions asked. He paused for a second, but I guess he had been in the business too long to pry. Luckily for me, he knew a couple of guys who fit the bill, but he recommended one of them specifically because of his reputation for discretion. If I needed a car sold, he would make it disappear with no risk of being traced back to me. All I needed to do was wait for the perfect moment when everybody was out of the house. That came a few days later, when my parents were at work and Alice's friends came to pick her up. I was the only one at home, and her car was sitting right there in the driveway. I looked around her room for her keys, doing my best not to disturb anything in the room. If all went well, I'd be able to pull this off without anyone knowing that I was behind it. I found her key in one of her drawers. I drove her car down to the location my contact had given me. The whole time I was driving, I could feel my heart beating out of my chest. I couldn't believe I was doing this. I'm not the criminal type, but I'd been driven to the edge. I was still uneasy when I met the guy. He was pretty intimidating, but he didn't ask any questions. Straight to business, which worked great for me at that moment. He paid me in cash with no paperwork at all, so the sale couldn't be traced. It went for about 40% of the actual value of the car, but I didn't care. The satisfaction I got was more than worth the 60% I was missing out on. Besides, it's not like I bought the car and I was selling it legally. 40% would cover my repairs and then some. If I could rate my buyer, I'd have given him 5 stars because he got the car running without the key just so I could put it back in her room. When I got home, I returned the key to where I found it and left the house immediately. I would have loved to see Alice's reaction when she found out her car was missing, but I didn't want anyone to know I was home when the car was stolen. I needed to be completely blameless in all of this. I went to hang out with a friend, and it took about 3 hours before I got a hysterical call from my mom. "Alice's car is missing. Did you take it by chance?" At first, I thought my mom was accusing me, and my heart stopped, but I realized she was just asking if I borrowed it. I told her that I'd never driven Alice's car. Then I put on some fake shock and asked if she was all right. After hearing that the car wasn't with me, my mom became hysterical and incoherent. I could barely make out that Alice was devastated and that they were going to call the police. Obviously, I knew the police would be called, so I had covered my tracks as thoroughly as possible. I'd deleted my texts with the contact who set me up with the buyer, and I'd hidden the cash from my sale in my car. My buyer had assured me that the car would have disappeared within hours. I hate to toot my own horn, but it felt like I'd pulled off the perfect crime. I told my mom I was on my way home. By the time I got back, everybody was home, including a couple of police officers. They took a statement and asked some questions, but we could tell that they had already formed their conclusion. Alice's key was still in her room, so it looked like someone had broken into her car and hotwired it. My dad said the car had a security system, but the cops just said that those could be bypassed with the right know-how. The other officer said that she might have forgotten to lock her car. We don't live in a place with neighbors conveniently placed across the street, so there wasn't video doorbell footage for them to check. The police promised that they would try to track down the car, but it was obvious that they weren't optimistic. Alice was inconsolable. Despite my parents' best efforts, she stormed around the house crying about her car being gone. My mom and dad were scrambling to find a way to comfort her. They were both distraught as well. The incident had shaken my dad more than he cared to admit, and he was constantly on the phone talking with the police to find out if they had discovered anything. I can't describe how satisfied I was seeing these people fall apart over Alice's car. Justice was served as far as I was concerned. Seeing them all get worked up over the missing car was just the start, though. The fact that I had enough to fix my car was the icing on the cake. I wanted to rush out and get my car repaired the very second I had the money, but I knew that I had to be smart about it. If I had repaired my car immediately after Alice's car went missing, it might look suspicious. I didn't know if anyone would actually blame me, but I didn't put that past them. I waited a few weeks until the uproar had died down in the house. By then, enough time had passed for it to be believable that I had saved the money up myself, so I went to get my car repaired. You can't understand what it felt like to finally have my car up and running again after it had been sitting broken down for weeks. Alice's jealousy only made things better. She couldn't stand the fact that I had a working car again and hers had been stolen. The best part is that I still had a lot of money left over to get my car cleaned up and running better than ever. In the end, Alice never found out what happened to the car. The police told my parents that there were no leads and that they were closing the case. I remember Alice's face when the officer said that the car had probably been chopped up or shipped out of state within a day of being stolen. Seeing the shock and disappointment on her face made me want to give it all up right there and confess that I had been the one to take the car, just so they would know it was me. I didn't say anything though, and I don't think anyone ever suspected me. Alice still hasn't gotten a new car. My parents can't afford another one so soon, and my dad is still battling with the insurance company, who seem to be giving him the runaround. Alice tried to borrow my car again, and my parents tried to back her, but I refused. I pointed out that no one had helped me repair my car after Alice had wrecked it, and that she wasn't ever going to drive it again. My parents tried to convince me, but there was no steam behind it. I think they realized that I had a point, and that they were asking too much this time. I don't care if anyone thinks I'm the a-hole this time. I'm glad I did what I did, and I would do it again. While your actions might seem extreme, it sounds like you were really pushed to your limits by your family's favoritism and disregard for your hard work. Maybe this was a wake-up call for your family to start recognizing your contributions and feelings. Wishing you the best moving forward, OP. What would you have done? Share it with us in the comments below. And thank you for joining us today in the rLounge. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. See you soon. And please put your chair back where you found it.